Thank you for having me along. I'm Antia on behalf of the Upper Murrumbidgee demonstration reach. I'm going to be talking about box elder, an emerging threat in our catchment. And I say emerging threat, like it's a weed that we're really concerned about along the river. And when I say emerging, it's a weed that's steadily climbing the invasion curve and it's getting to the steep part. But I'd just like to acknowledge the Upper Murrumbidgee demonstration reach. We're a landscape scale conservation partnership that's looking to improve and protect the Upper Murrumbidgee River between Tantanga and Burrinjuck Dam. And this initiative is led by a group of key partners, which I'd just like to acknowledge on screen. Next slide. So the Upper Murrumbidgee demonstration reach, this is our focus reach, and we're essentially a project that's looking to protect and recover native fish populations in the catchment. We have two nationally significant populations of native fish. We've got Macquarie perch, which are found in this uphand part of the reach, and then we've got Murray cod, which is found in this part of the reach. We used to have trout cod in the river as well. These populations are nationally significant. They're small but resilient, but they are also natural populations. They're not stock populations. They've always been in the Upper Murrumbidgee. Part of the reason why these are retained in the Upper Murrumbidgee is because the Upper Murrumbidgee has got some really high quality areas along the river, and some of those areas are the gorge sections, and so I've marked those in orange along here. So you can see that these gorge areas are protected, and then we've got more open alluvial and historically changed areas in between. And this is really important for box elder because box elder is impacting these high conservation areas along the river and the riparian health. I'll be talking more about that. But by protecting the health of the river, that means protecting water quality, it means protecting habitat, and that is what we need for the recovery of these native fish populations. All of those things that are needed to recover native fish are also the things that we need to provide clean water. Canberra potentially will get its water supply from the Upper Murrumbidgee. Cooma, we get our water supply from here. So protecting native fish means we will protect those other values, recreational swimming values along the river as well. So as the native fish strategy identified, which was a great bit of science, native fish are really the canary in the coal mine. If we're getting it right to recover native fish populations, we're actually getting it right for all of the other values on the river, which is not only conservation, but also irrigation and water supply. And this is what some of those high conservation value areas look like. This is the Upper Murrumbidgee River in the Bredbo Gorge. I also would like to acknowledge that the Upper Murrumbidgee catchment is Ngunnawal and Ngarigo country. This is the beautiful country that traditional owners protected for thousands of years and that we have the benefit of living in. These are the high conservation areas. And this is the bottom end of the Bredbo Gorge, and one of the really important areas within the Upper Murrumbidgee are these riparian shrublands. So an upland river, a healthy upland river should have clean, crystal clean water, free of nutrients. And the ecology of an upland river, it gets all of its nutrients and all of its carbon to drive the food chain actually comes from the catchment, not in stream. So when the river and the flows come up and inundate these shrublands, that's when the organic carbon comes into the river, driving that river productivity, driving the food chains that then provide the water bugs that then protect our native fish and our platypus. So we talked about flows earlier, so the natural flow regime is really important, but it's these kind of natural areas with the healthy riparian zones, deep-rooted native vegetation, and these riparian floodplains which can get inundated and then drive the productivity of the river are really important to be protected for the health of the river. And this brings us to why box elder is such an emerging threat. So you've probably all seen a box elder, and hopefully after this talk you'll all see them driving around everywhere. And one of the most accurate descriptions that I've had of a box elder in my reading is that the box elder is a common yet slightly unkempt street tree. And this is what you see here. This is growing here actually at Mittagang Crossing in the picnic area there. And yeah, they are a very common street tree. And in our catchment, they're just taking off. In the last 10 years, we've noticed that they're really starting to spread naturally and on their own accord, and this is why we're so concerned. One of the things I'd like to point out to you here is the unkempt part of this tree, and this is how you recognise the seeding box elder. They have a male and a female plant. That's the old, this is where the seeds were hanging off, so you see these, the old branches where the seeds were. So you can see them anywhere, likely in a street setting, but now also spreading into our environment. So they're amazingly resilient plant. They will just grow anywhere. So this is a box elder in Cooma, taking off and just growing in the gutters there. That's now being cleaned out. So the Upper Murrumbidgee Demonstration Reach, we've been running an adventure volunteer program. So one of the things that we've been doing is weed mapping and habitat mapping within these high conservation areas. So again, you can see how beautiful the river is, how native the river is. This is down near Mikalego, and this is taken in about 2017. And we'd been mapping this for a long time, and when I look back, it's like, yep, that was the first time I started going, what is that? What's coming up here? And you can kind of see this box elder starting to grow. One of the reasons we were surprised is because the riparian vegetation in these high conservation, or in these good quality areas of the Upper Murrumbidgee has been fairly resistant to weeds. And we know that areas that have really high integrity native vegetation are typically much more resistant to weed invasion than disturbed ecosystems. So that must be a pretty invasive weed to get a go on there. Typically what we just see in terms of weed invasion along the river is we just see willows that would colonise here. And underneath this dense shrub layer, you typically don't even get African lovegrass, which could very well come in here in the flood. We typically don't even get that taking off. So that was a real flag to us, so you can kind of see. One thing I want to point out to you, that if you're in native vegetation, if you see something like that, head over. It's most likely a box elder. They're very distinct. And this is what we're seeing. We are just seeing that this is a whole range of, these are box elders at various age classes. So you're seeing one seeding event, another one and another one, and they will just grow like this. They will just start growing in vegetation like a bamboo forest. They're really thick. And Queanbeyan landcare, you talked to that, you're noticing that they will grow in these. This is a bed of Phragmites. So typically, any weed seed that flies in here is not even going to make the ground. Box elder has a seed, the helicopter seed, it's very heavy, and it'll land down, and it's even taking off in this reed bed. And that's a huge red flag because that's massively invasive. We would not expect, usually we don't have to control any other willows, maybe a little bit of blackberry in this type of setting. So the fact that that can survive. I talked about the importance of the riparian shrublands. So again, prior to 2016, this was pretty much just a native shrubland, and these box elders are probably only about 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, and you can see how aggressively that's taken over that shrubland. When we think back on the box elder, we think that this box elder spread out in 2016 when we had a very dry year. The river was very, very low, and then we had a flood through in June of 2016, and it was a massive flood. It was one of the big floods, and we think that the box elder seed got carried down and it now is a real legacy. But you can see it's taking over this shrubland and will continue to do so because now we have seeding plants, and the seed will sort of spread locally. They fall into the river and get carried off. The river corridors are like wind corridors, so they're flying around everywhere. And each plant can have thousands of leaves. When you look into the biology of the plant, box elder can grow up to 8 metres tall, and it has an allelopathic effect. So underneath, it stops other things growing. So in terms of regenerating in this native shrubland, that's a really bad thing. And remember what I told you about that these shrublands are really important for feeding the organic carbon. Well, upland streams are fed by native vegetation, so there's a little bit of organic carbon going in all year because we don't have that seasonal leaf fall. these don't drop any leaves all through the year, and then we get massive leaf fall in one part of the year. There's a massive export of carbon into the river, and then we get nutrient enrichment. It's just not the right thing for our waterways. So that's why we're really concerned about box elder along the Upper Murrumbidgee. But I think you will start noticing that in all types of other areas, box elder can really take over. I mean, even in an urban setting, if you had something coming up like a bamboo forest, that really prevents the amenity of a place when you can't go through. So you just looked at this picture, and now I'd like to point out to you, can you see these box elders? So we've actually been controlling box elders. This is a very recent picture, and I'll talk about that, but they are actually very resistant, so you need to have a 3-stage control program. But here's another example of where box elders are taking over. With the UMDR Adventures volunteer program, we started that program inspired by the Willow Warriors. So the Willow Warriors paddle along and they work in remote areas to protect those from the willow threat. And when I spoke to them about box elder, they said, oh, geez, Antia, you really better get onto that, because we were in your situation on the Hawkesbury-Nepean River 20 years ago, and we just thought, oh, well, it's probably just, a random thing. And they said, we lost, it just climbed the inversion cave. We dropped, we couldn't control it after that. So, so we're at that stage, but as I said, we are rapidly climbing that invasion curve. So, okay, so now what I'd like to do is I want to go a little bit into the biology of the box elder and just some ID tips and tricks so that you can, like me, not go anywhere without recognising a box elder. Here's another example of the box elders this is underneath the riparian shrubland. This is Jeff Cottrell, who started off Willow Warriors, Friends of the Colo. And, when we saw this, we were really concerned. So we were crawling under there to control this, the box elder there. But this is what we're seeing. This is the level of all of these little broadleaf plants that you're seeing is box elder, and then that's hemlock. But this is what we're seeing underneath the canopy, and that's a real concern. Again, just how to recognise it. If you're in a native area, you're going to see this big lime green, dense kind of bush. And the other thing to look out for, they've kind of got these spires. That's, willow. But yeah, you can sort of see the box elder grows in these long type of spires. So this is a box elder about in the probably 2 years old, growing out of, this was in a bush at Bumbalong bushfire controlled area. But that's the first thing you'll see, this sort of spire-like thing. This time of year, they're starting to turn a little bit yellow. So this time of year, they'll really stick out to you. So another bit of ID, again, you'll see these spires coming out of the native vegetation, lime green, and these big leaves. So in terms of native vegetation, you just can kind of see that they shouldn't be there. Again, this is a seeding event. So you might see, oh, what's that sort of green stuff? So, you can sort of see how many seeds pop up. And then from the photo that I showed you before, how many kind of grow on from there to germinate, so you can get a really dense. And the first thing that you'll notice is this lobed leaf with these little kind of jagged edges around them and that colour. Or you might find like a little lime green leaf. But again, this is just growing in a spot that I would not expect many weeds to take off. So, that's just a real red flag for us. They can just grow anywhere. So yeah, just another point around, this is on the Gudgeonby. This is a rock revetment, and you can see it's just happily growing in amongst the blackberry, in amongst the rock. But yeah, this time of year you'll see that slight orange, yellow leaves as it's starting to turn. So this is a good time of year to really see where the box elders might be growing. This is on the Cooma Creek, and then yeah, big yellow kind of mass. As the leaves turn brown. So in terms of leaves, so they can have, they have a compound leaf. So this is what you'll see, they'll either have 3, 5 or 7 leaves. You can have any of that combination. This is obviously more of the mature type of leaf. And then this is what you might typically see on a seedling. And here we have as I said, there's male and female trees. And here you have the helicopter seed. That's still in the green form. the point I was making, you know, it's a very mobile seed, so it can be blown for long distances. And also it has a heavy seed, so it'll blow along and then the helicopter will come down, and this is what can penetrate the vegetation and take off. The other way to recognise it, they have this very distinct kind of bark on the young growth that can be sort of grey with green, and then you've got this very distinct type of nodes. You've got opposite leaves coming up, and then that spire shape kind of has a very distinct branching arrangement. And here you can see kind of the nodes and the other type of bark that you can have, and then that's the older bark that you have. And then this is the bark on the oldest tree. It gets quite thick. The box elder has male and female plants. As I said, what happens is in the winter they lose their leaves, and then the first thing that happens in the spring is the flowers come out. So this is the male flower. So you can see they're just little bunches of stamen. This is where the pollen will come out, and they're just arranged along the branch, and then the leaves come second. So this is typically what you see on a male tree. And then at the same time you will have female trees, or we call them cedar trees. So this is typically what you'll see on a cedar tree. So again, you're getting the flowers before the leaves. And this is, you can see, this is the fruiting body. You can kind of, this is where the ovary is. So you can see it's kind of got the little helicopter seed already, all ready to go. That's kind of reminiscent of the little helicopter seed. So that'll just grow. And yeah, and a little bit differently arranged. You can see it's a little bit more compound. And then you've got these little buds that open up on the female tree. This is what the seed looks like. So what happens is the leaves fall off, the flowers. This is early spring, so the fruit will develop pretty quickly, and then the seed is actually retained on the plant all through the year, as it's as the leaves, and then the seed will be retained on the tree all through winter, and then once the leaves drop in winter. And there's no more leaves, these will actually drop in early spring. So you can see what the tree does. It's actually dropping its ripe fruit and to be able to germinate before the tree leaves up again in the spring. And that's what so in the winter, this is very distinct. You'll actually see the tree being retained, ready to drop in the autumn, and that's another key feature. But basically, box elder is very hard to treat. And basically you need to use bush regeneration methods. So pretty much you can spray the box elder when it's small and in leaf. And then in waterways we can only use Roundup Bioactive to treat it. But what we've found is that box elder requires much more Roundup than you would when you were cutting and painting another weed like a willow, for example. So pretty much what we're doing with the Adventure Volunteers, we're hand pulling them when they're that big. We will only cut and paint when they're very tiny, only about as big as your thumb, very small. It's really important to cut and paint them close to the ground, because any stem that's actually left with light shining on it will sucker. So they have a real suckering problem. Similarly with the stem injecting, we can treat them up to 3 times and they will still re-sucker. So we've had to adjust our methods a bit. But if you're going to treat them, the type of things that you need to take into consideration if you're planning a control program, only treat them through the growing season. With bush regen, we often treat things, especially with cut and paint, when they're dormant. You can't do that with box elder. Only through the growing season when they've got full green leaf. Preventing seeding events, because they are so aggressive, I think is our #1 priority. And if you have any box elder on site that are just 2 to 3 years old, treat them before they seed, because we've been mapping them and they will start seeding from up to 3 years on. So prevent seeding, and if you have a lot of plants on site, take out the seeding plants first and then deal with the males. And then up to 3 control passes may be required. And so you'll do, especially when you're stem injecting older ones, usually it's good practice with willows to leave them for a year anyway, in situ to let them to die. But you need to do, especially for more mature plants, up to 3 control passes. And we've actually been using a little bit more Roundup than you'd be typically using just in your common bush regen, because you can have that suckering event. So just be really aware of that to go and check your site. If you are doing control, I'm saying maximum 2 years apart, because if you don't come and retreat that suckers within the 2 years, you're going to have lost your spray window, and you will have hundreds of suckers that you then have to stem inject or scrape. That takes a lot of work. So if you want to do the retreat with a spray, don't leave it for more than 2 years. But we've had to go back up to 3 times to get a maximum kill rate on any site. So if you do 1 pass and you let it forget, you're going to have a massive suckering event, and it's going to be much more work and cost much more money. And so we really, any control program, it has to be a 3-pass program, not initial control follow-up, but 3-pass. Use the appropriate control method, and also the only chemical that we can use near waterways is glyphosate, registered for use near waterways. That is the glyphosate without the surfactant in it. And so because that is not and you will use that under an off-label permit for bush weeding, for conservation weeding. You have to put these things into play, because Roundup is not the herbicide that's registered for this weed. We've been looking at box elder for a long time, so we've actually developed a box elder management guide with the awesome team at the ARC. You can find that on the Rivers of Carbon website. There's also been a lot of work done in the Blue Mountains. Blue Mountains Council are really onto box elder, so there's some YouTubes to watch that just gives you the nuances on those control methods. Weeds Australia, and then also UMDR website will tell you about our projects. I think in summing up, in terms of doing this presentation to the UMCN, my main message to the UMCN is we really need to list this as a priority weed in our catchment. We've done a lot of good work with the council, and the Cooma-Snowman, our regional council, is really amazing and on the front foot with a lot of weeds. They've registered as a local weed of concern under their biosecurity legislation. The ACT have listed it as a priority weed, but we need to just advocate to have this weed moved up on those ratings with councils. And that also helps us with fundings, because a lot of the time weed funding, they want you to link it back to local and regional weed strategies. Thank you very much.